Anson Dorrance, or should I say Coach Dorrance, it's a real pleasure to have you on the Strive 365 podcast.
Well, it's my pleasure to join you. I appreciate the invitation. Thank you.
Anson, or maybe I'll call you Coach, you are one of my very early influences that inspired me to go down the coaching road as I was sort of toying with the idea of playing and coaching and trying to make that transition. I recently finished up my college career in North Carolina, and we'll get to North Carolina shortly. But I was in Portland. I was at my best friend's wedding. I was in the famous Portland bookstore with sipping a coffee. I think I was doing the West Coast thing, and I came across one of your books, and I've started flicking through it. I knew of you. I knew of UNC. But it grabbed me for that 5 minutes. I was flicking it through, and back then, as a mid 20-year-old, I didn't read books, to be perfectly honest. I do now. So your book was one of the early ones, and it got me hooked. And I bought it, and I finished it before I got back to New Zealand on the plane. That was how enthralled I was with it, and some of the pieces. And we'll come to that shortly. And that brought me on to the next book of yours, and then it allowed me to feel confident enough to reach out. I think in one of your books you had at the last page, like, here's my email address, or don't be afraid to reach out if you've made it this far. And I sent you an email maybe a year or so later, using the disguise of one of these New Zealand players that we have that's working in America, and just to sort of form a connection. And that would have been close to 15 years ago, probably over actually. So we have never met before. This is the first time. But we have remained in email communication over a number of different players, both at New Zealand Football and Melbourne Victory over a number of years. So, yeah, whilst I've never met each other, I do feel connected to you in other ways. So it's a real honour to be able to spend the next hour talking all things soccer with you.
Well, I appreciate that. Thank you.
We spoke about your bio in the intro, but you've just finished up as a head coach after 47 years. Now, that in itself is just worth digging into as a podcast. But let's just start by asking, how did you sustain yourself, your energy, your love, your drive, your quality, your health for such a long time in a profession that takes so much?
Well, that's a fantastic question, because honestly, the reason I step back is I'm just out of energy. It's exhausting. And there was a stretch there when I was hired as the men's coach here at the University of North Carolina. And what was cool about the hire is I was so young, I was coaching guys I had played with. The guy that mentored me as an undergraduate and was my head coach, he stepped back. He was a physical education instructor here at the University of North Carolina. And he decided to step back. And what was really cool about when he stepped back, he went in and told the athletic director at the University of North Carolina to hire me to replace him. And I was just gobsmacked when I went into the AD's office, basically with a list of extraordinary American coaches for him to hire, when Dr. Marvin Allen stepped back. And then I was just shocked when Mr. Bill Kobe offered me the position to succeed Marvin Allen as the head men's coach here at UNC. I was already admitted to law school. My ambition was to be my dad's corporate attorney. My dad was starting his own oil business. And so for me, I had no real interest in coaching, but I felt this would be a way for me to supplement the income that my wife was providing for our family so I could attend law school. So I had no real ambitions to coach. I was just doing this as a part-time income to assist my wife, who was working full-time as a dance instructor in the community. And I was going to finish my law degree, go to work for my dad, and live happily ever after. And then, of course, retire on a yacht in the Mediterranean. And then all of a sudden, I fell in love with coaching. And initially, I was just coaching the men. But as I'm finishing my law degree, and usually you finish law school in 3 years, it was taking me into my fourth year to get the law degree so I could spend some time coaching the men. And in that spring of my third year, I still had 6 courses to go to get the degree. And the athletic director found me and said, Anson, there's a women's club on campus that has petitioned for varsity status. Do you mind coming and vet them for me. So I said, sure. So I went to watch this club team play. And of course, in the shadow of Title IX, and Title IX, of course, was the legislation in the United States that made it critical for every collegiate athletic department to balance the amount of spending on their men and women and try to make it as equal as possible using three different prongs for basically making it equal. And he felt the pressure of basically this looming. And he asked me after I'd been watching this club team a while what I thought. And I said, honestly, they're pretty good. So now I'm shilling for the women. And I'm telling him, yep, I'll share facilities with them. I'll share, game days with them. Yeah, let's make them a varsity. And then, much to my shock and to some extent horror, he said, well, Anson, if you will coach both teams, I will make your part-time men's position a full-time position. And that was history. So I tried to finish my law degree that next year, coaching the men and women and going to law school. And that was overwhelming. And finally, one day in maybe late September, early October, I came home and I just shared with my wife that I was thinking of dropping out of law school, and I loved it. She fully endorsed it. She had no problem with it. Obviously the income was going to be very minimal, certainly compared to a corporate lawyer salary, but she was behind it 100%. She knew this was going to make us happy as a couple. And so I did it. And then basically for the next 10 years, I coached men and women, men 2 to 4, women 4 to 6, double headers on weekends. And then during that stretch, I also coached the U.S. women's full national team from 1986 to 1994. So you're right about the investment of energy. It was an extraordinary investment, but I absolutely loved it. And, following the cliche, if you really enjoy, your work, you're never going to have to work a day in your life. And that's the way I felt. And it was only more recently that I felt that, I was becoming fatigued. But for me, coaching all three teams was just magnificent. And I have thoroughly enjoyed it.
Let's unpack these a little bit time at a time, because I can tell by your energy coming through the screen and through the voice that you've still got a lot. And I just made a note. I think I had this conversation last week with some senior national team coaches. Part of the role is also giving back. Whether we like it or not, we get asked. And it's almost, in my opinion, it's kind of our duty to be able to come onto a senior coaching course and provide a workshop, to speak at an event, to maybe come on a podcast and talk about coaching. All these little things about giving back to the industry, giving back to certain people that have helped us or are on their own journey is part of the role. And you talk about that energy. Sometimes I think that can really drain energy, or we can be low, but sometimes it gives us some additional energy when we get in front of like-minded people and we can get to speak coaching rather than just always planning and delivering. So you've still got plenty of energy to give. So let's crack on. I guess let's pick up from these 10 years of coaching both the men's and the women. So a lot of the audience, the coaching audience listening in, have potentially either experienced that or are experiencing coaching multiple teams at the same time. Difficult to coordinate, but certainly possible. And you spoke about there your job going from part-time to full-time. That's the reality of a lot of coaches in this part of the world, where we're picking up multiple coaching portfolios or roles or teams to make more of a living. I guess think back to your experience now and provide us the real value of taking on multiple teams rather than the kind of the drain on energy and the racing from here to here. But how would you advocate for coaches, especially developing coaches, taking on more than one team at a time? Like, how did that help shape your qualities as a coach? And what are some advice to coaches in that sort of situation that you can share?
Yeah, first of all, I genuinely feel that a part of my evolution as a coach is having two teams at a very high Division I level to coach at the same time. So most of the people I was competing against only had one team to coach. And so I think what was interesting is I doubled my experience. So over the course of those 10 years coaching two teams, I in effect got 20 years worth of coaching experience. And I think that was incredibly valuable for me, especially starting in the men's game. and then jumping into the women's game because I had a wonderful opportunity to impact on the development of the women's game. And one of the reasons is because of my experience in the men's game. So I saw a lot of things in the men's game. I thought we could change the women's game to make it an even more effective and attractive product. And a lot of the times when I was trying to develop an audience for the women, we did it in conjunction with the men because initially no one cared at all about the women's game. So we would schedule double headers where the men's team would play first. We would have the women warm up on an adjacent field. And literally, as the men were leaving the field, the women would kick off in the next game. And what we were trying to do is to keep the crowd, to let them at least have a taste of this gender football, this women's team play, in the hopes of trying to attract them to keep them watching. And so we basically, having these two teams together, gave us an opportunity in all kinds of respects for me to gain more experience as a coach, which obviously I think benefited me in the most aggressive way. But I also think coming from the men's game, it gave me a head start in the women's game that was powerful because I knew how to organize a training environment. I knew how to effectively recruit. I knew how to manage a budget. And back in those days, my budget for both the men and the women were exceptionally small. So I knew how to put, two teams on one bus and make sure when we traveled somewhere, it was a double header. So I figured out, economies of scale in a very good way, which I thought benefited the evolution of my women's team. But also the experience I gained from coaching both was just remarkable. So I never look back on those days as being overwhelmed, or even though now I'm looking back thinking, how the heck did I ever do that? But what's interesting about the difference between then and now is back then, no email, no text messaging. Right now of the week, I will look at my phone and my phone will tell me that basically I have been on it on an average 4.5 hours a day. And it's stunning for me to do that. And so back then, I didn't really have the interference of a device that I was carrying sort of interfering with my day like we do now. And so basically these days, with the advent of technology and the fact that everyone now has access to you, it is a bit more overwhelming than the old days. And so back then, I was not as overwhelmed. I didn't have a device that was nagging me to death, every minute of every day. It was just an incredibly joyous celebration of the kids I was coaching. So did I benefit? Yes. I got the experience that made a difference. I also had a runway for the women that few people had because of my experience on the men's side. So I think those two things benefited me. One, certainly my experience, but also benefited me in helping the evolution of a new game, a new gender playing our game. And so for me, it was wonderfully beneficial.
As somebody who's also involved in coaching in the female game, I see incredible value going into that space as a coach. Not to kind of accelerate up a ladder or anything, but to share my characters, my beliefs with a set of players that I believe resonate better with me than potentially the male side. What would you suggest that you've learnt by coaching females that if you were to go back into a men's environment now, you would be a better coach for that experience? How would coaching females better prepare you for going into a male's game? I'm framing that from a context of sometimes coaches, male coaches in particular, we'll talk about this in a second, are hesitant to go into the female game because maybe the game's slower or they're not sure how to interact or it's not real coaching. But where I'd argue to go, well, it's actually harder, especially as a male going into that environment, and it prepares you better to go into the men's game based on the qualities and skill sets you can refine by coaching females.
Well, for me, the nice thing about coaching both for 10 years is I developed an expertise in the differences in leading men and women. And so even to this day, I go on speaking engagements where my topic is the differences in leading men and women. And where did I gain that? I gained that in the 10 years of making mistakes in coaching women for the first time. So there is a transition period. And keep in mind, when I was an undergraduate at the University of North Carolina in the early 1970s, the feminist literature was telling us that there are no differences between men and women, only environmental influences that pushed us in different directions. So I thought this was wonderful because I wasn't really that comfortable with women. I joke about this all the time. I went to a boys' boarding school for my high school education. The closest I came to a woman in those days is I had the leading female role in the school play my senior year. So that was my experience with women in high school. I acted like I was a woman in the plays that was given, at my boys' boarding school. So I didn't have any real comfort coaching women. And even when I got to UNC, it was predominantly male. We had transfers from UNC Greensboro or Meredith College into UNC as juniors. There are very few women on campus. So even when I got to college, there weren't very many women around, and I just was never really that comfortable with basically the other gender. And I certainly was not going to be comfortable coaching them until I read basically that, the feminists were telling us we're the same. And I was thinking, this is absolutely perfect. So I couldn't wait to design basically one session and coach both teams the same way, treat them the same way. And it was just one horrific mistake after another. Because even though I think we would love to pretend that, we are exactly the same, I think the fear that the feminists have is that if we start to mark differences, it's the first step in making sure that we are unequal. And I don't think the radical feminists ever wanted to introduce any sort of policy or admission that there were any differences at all, because then inequality creeps in. So I understand their reluctance to basically make a statement that, well, we are actually different. But what I learned very early is we are. Men and women are different. Men and women have to be coached differently. And the thing I learned right out of the gate almost immediately from coaching the women is you weren't going to lead any of the women on your roster unless they trusted you. For them to trust you, you had to develop a relationship with them that demonstrated that you were trustworthy. And with the men, it's a little bit different. You can actually motivate and inspire men just by being dominant, by being incredibly knowledgeable or incredibly aggressive or incredibly this or incredibly that. And you can intimidate them into basically going in the direction you want by manipulating playing time and everything else. And these certainly aren't positive leadership qualities, but it's a lot easier on the men's side to basically let them know that, this is what has to happen if you want to get on the field. And the relationship piece isn't really as critical as it is on the women's side. If you aren't interested in developing a relationship with the young women that you're coaching, trust me, they are not going to trust you. And so what's vital right out of the bat is that. But the benefit of coaching the women is they are extraordinarily coachable. The men aren't always that way. The men will actually fight you. And it's your ability to win that fight is going to determine whether or not you're going to have any sort of coaching quality and power over the men. And so the cliches I've used in coaching clinics when I was learning these differences between leading men and women is the men are actually harder to coach, but there is an upside to the men. The men are easier to manage. And so on the women's side, they're actually easier to coach because when you make a coaching suggestion for the women, they are not going to fight you. The men will fight you until you can demonstrate to them that you know the way. And then when you can, either through the power of your own personality or with your capacity to basically intimidate them, they're going to be a greater challenge for you to coach. But the challenge on the women's side isn't coaching them because they're going to try to do everything you ask. But the challenge is managing them, getting them to sort of connect with each other emotionally in a very positive way. On the men's side, that isn't as big of an issue. And so the challenge, and these are obviously cliches, are there exceptions? Absolutely. There are exceptions all over the place. But cliches that someone going for the men's game and the women's game should learn early is the most critical thing to be trusted is to make sure you are trusted. So develop an individual relationship with each player on your roster so they can get a sense that you have some sort of respect for them in a very real way that is trustworthy. And then you're going to be in a position to lead them effectively. So men are harder to coach, easier to manage. Women are easier to coach, harder to manage. And it's the basically the leadership agility that you have that'll put you in a position to be extraordinary with both. Now, to answer a question you had in there earlier about what can you take from the women's game and take it into the men's game. Well, this connectiveness. But the only thing I'm afraid if you start to do that on the men's side is they will be searching for that, I guess, way to exploit you. And so in a way, when you start to try to develop these close personal relationships with men, they might look at it as a sign of weakness and then take advantage of you. And so there's still a challenge when you try to take, one gender's coaching strategies into the other gender, because I have made mistakes on both sides of the gender divide. And it was only through my mistakes that it changed the way I was going to lead men and then to lead women. And I learned a lot along the way.
I just wonder if you have a heap of questions, but just the word you use there, mistakes. I wonder if there's any that jump out at you that you can share that can save our time on our coaching journey, or potentially might view mistakes as a necessity and you need to make these mistakes in order to develop as a coach. But would there be any obvious mistakes that you can share with coaches and myself listening that can save us possibly the heartache and hassle of making those ourselves?
Yeah, I remember the first mistakes I made right out of the gate is on the men's side. I would probably use their last names and setting up a lineup or coaching them on the field. And then I'm doing that for the women. And they actually did a recent documentary of my program. And they interviewed one of the early women, because obviously those are the women that I basically scarred. And this one woman named Susan Ellis on the documentary said, my name isn't Ellis, it's Susan. And so she was almost instructing me through the video the way she preferred to be called. Now, of course, I learned that pretty quickly, but really early in coaching the women, I would literally treat them exactly the way I did the men. And all I can tell you is it was a disaster. And that's just one of many mistakes. But basically what I learned is you got to connect with them. You have to win their trust. And winning their trust is not, going to be done just through your training environments and, what happens in your game substitution or something. No, it's got to be, the way you treat them, the way you respect them, the way you are empathetic towards all of the different issues in their lives. So what they get a sense of is that you actually care about them. You care about them in their capacity to develop as human beings beyond their ability to score goals for you and create shutouts if they're a defender. So you've got to have a relationship with them, beyond the aspects of the X's and O's in the game itself. Because if your relationship with them is just transactional based on their ability to help you win, it's going to be a very thin relationship that's not going to last very long and isn't going to be close enough for you to actually impact them in the way that you would like to in a positive way. So that connection is absolutely critical. And you should be doing things all the time to let them know your respect for them. What weapons do we have now? Well, actually, the phone is a great weapon. One of the biggest mistakes I used to make, and I just remember this distinctly, is, following an extraordinary result for a men's team. You would go into the locker room following the game, and you would point to the guy that sort of carried you, and, on your back today, John, you were absolutely extraordinary. And everyone in the room is patting John on the back. He thinks this is the greatest thing, and he feels honored. Everyone in the room embraces the fact that he was the best person on the field. And I was thinking, I couldn't wait to, honor one of my young women in this fashion. We got the team together following a women's game, and I pointed to Mary. Mary, on your back, you carried us today, and you could hear a pin drop in the room because everyone now hated Mary with a passion. And they didn't just hate Mary with a passion, they hated you with a passion for praising Mary and not praising them. So all of a sudden, you're developing sort of a divisive, context because you don't know how to set this thing up. What an extraordinary performance from an amazing woman. The best way to do it, honestly, I've discovered, is to walk alongside her after the game and say, hey, Mary, you were awesome today. And a voice only she could hear. So now she feels a connection with you that's more personal than this sort of public forum where she is a bit embarrassed, of being called out in front of her peers. And so for me, and are those just two of the things? No, they're all kinds of things that I learned along the way. But those were two of the most punishing things early.
Yeah, you spoke.
Well, I'll give you a halftime talk. This is obviously all the coaches will identify with this. I mean, this actually works with men. We were playing Wake Forest. This is the second year they had a varsity. No way a second year varsity should be on the field with my men. And I think we were tied at half. And I go into the locker room and I'm just mad as hell because nothing was right. No energy, no attacking personality, no defensive presence. Our shape sucked. No one seemed interested in the game. And so I came in there, and what's critical with either team, if you're upset, is to come in and you start pacing back and forth like a caged tiger. The trouble with a men's team is they're not the most sensitive creatures in the world, so they don't really understand how pissed you are. But eventually someone with an IQ above 100 will say, oh my gosh, he looks pissed. And then when the room finally does, settle down, I was so angry with the team on this particular day. I saw a waste paper basket out of the corner of my eye. I ran over there on my right instep. I kicked it through a window and I stormed out of the locker room. Here's what's interesting about men. That spoke volumes to my men's team. Their attacking shape changed dramatically. Their energy went up several levels. I mean, it was transformational what a kick of a waste paper basket through a window would do to the men's team. What the women would correctly surmise is that you were a psychotic and they should flee the room, because that certainly doesn't work with a women's team. So the men got that message. With the women, the halftime can start the same way. You come in, they've had a miserable first half. You start pacing back and forth like a caged tiger. And then, of course, this is your women's team. They know immediately that you're pissed. You turn to face them. And then what's absolutely vital is your tone. You say, that girl that scored 5 goals against us, let's mark her this period. And just because you haven't screamed at anyone, you haven't humiliated anyone, you haven't ripped them a new one, they're going to basically die for you in the second half. Just with suggestions like, why don't we try marking her this period? The critical elements are tone, it's information, it's support, and it's solutions. It's not, the old hair dryer effect of Old Trafford when, he's in the room screaming and kicking a shoe at David Beckham's head, where Ferguson is motivating these extraordinarily talented men to do a better job in the second half. That does not work with women. So there's a different sort of leadership dynamic. And it was only, again, through my own trial and error that I learned how to become a more effective coach of women.
Yeah, I have a similar story back as a young coach, first year coaching senior women, one of the early games of the season. We weren't playing well. Come to the change room, slam the door, think that this is going to get their attention. They know by that action that I'm not happy, and then tried to proceed with what you spoke about, tone, information, solutions. I thought was reasonably clear throughout that halftime break, but the action of coming in and slamming a door, sit down, listen, and then be calm, and so trying to bring a bit of both. And then they went out and didn't play overly well. The second half, we lost the game, and but I'd lost a lot of trust that had been built up in the early part of the year because of that action. And I was super fortunate that I had one of the senior players on the next training session. I think she sort of pulled me aside quietly, not from the group. She said, "Don't ever do that. Don't ever slam the door in our face again, or else you won't be coaching here much longer." And that was amazing that I had a player feel comfortable or felt she wanted to share that with me. And that really helped make a mistake early, learn from that. But if coaches can listen and can go, well, here's two coaches that had similar experiences early on, just take the advice and move on. I just want to go back to the connection, relationship, trust, care piece. I read something in one of your books about writing a senior letter to players. So for me, that's just one other example. I'd love for you to sort of unpack that for us. But it's also about building a relationship that lasts longer than the time that you are their coach. So for me, I interpret that as not only being a nice guy, but it's strategic in the way of, as people leave my environment, they leave positive with a relationship, with a connection, that they will either come back as a fan to my environment, or maybe speak good of my environment to other potential recruits, which has the circular notion of, repaying the faith. Was it more than just showing that senior player that you respect their time and energy and efforts for that window of time, or was it about trying to create something long lasting as well?
First of all, you're absolutely spot on. Did you read the biography, The Man Watching?
I did. Yeah, that was the first book. Yeah.
Yeah, The Man Watching. There was a senior writer for Sports Illustrated by the name of Tim Carruthers that gave me a call one day out of the blue, and he said, Anson, I'd love to come down and spend a year with you and write a book about you and the program. Do you have any issue with that? I said, not an issue at all. So he comes down. We gave him full access to everything. And he ended up spending 5 years with us. The first draft of the book he sent to the publishers was over 1,000 pages. The publisher said, there is no way we can sell a $1,000 page. I'm sorry, 1,000-page soccer book. So he hacked it down to maybe 450 pages or something, and he made the margins, very narrow. So, and the print small. So they stuffed everything into this book that he could. And what was really interesting about his review of everything, and even like the senior letters sort of things, is The Man Watching is a statement. It's a Rainer Maria Rilke poem. So if you read it in English, and obviously it's translated from the German, it talks about basically another man watching. But the reason he selected that as a title, when I write those senior letters, I have watched that particular player for basically 3.5 years. And the reason it's not 4 years is because the season we have is a fall season, and December is when the fourth NCAA tournament event is over. So it's a 3.5 year, I guess, relationship I have with these kids. What I think shocks them in the senior letters is how much I've noticed about them. And if you want to get really close to someone, one of the critical elements is for you to demonstrate how well you know them. And in knowing them, you are reviewing things you've seen that have won your affection for them in the most personal way. And the cool thing about the way we do it is I don't write the letters in advance. I wait until the weekend itself. I only read the letters if we're in their national championship final. And it's the cauldron of that emotion near the end of their careers that I want to capture in this note I'm going to write them. Now, it's exhausting because if I have, 6, 7, or 8 seniors, writing a personal letter actually most of the night, and then transcribing it, because obviously when I'm writing the rough draft, it's chicken scratch. No one could read it. So though I'm actually translating it into a note on some nice stationery and then photocopying it. Why am I photocopying it? Because I'm going to read it to the entire team with them not in the room. So then I hand it to them the next morning. And of course, I'm, just exhausted. I've gotten maybe 4 or 5 hours sleep. I'm just wasted, but it doesn't really matter because I'm sitting on the bench. I don't have anything to do in the game except watch the result. And of course, now I'm trying to motivate them. So what the letter basically communicates with them is I think they are extraordinary human beings. Every now and again, the note will have something about their soccer game, but usually it does not. Usually it's my insight into who they are as human beings, the way they've treated the people around them. The day I noticed them do this, which was incredibly generous or charitable or heartwarming. And so what they see is they see what I value. Very rarely is it some soccer quality that I value. It's some human quality. And when I'm reading that to the team, and none of them are in the room by now, by the way, all the seniors are outside, and I'm reading these letters. And of course, because everyone in the room knows I've captured them. Why? Because these are their teammates. They know that everything I'm saying is the absolute truth about how extraordinary they are as human beings. We want everyone in the room to make sure that we send every one of those kids out winners. And now they've got additional fuel to basically burn, to come in and basically kill themselves to send these extraordinary women out champions. And it's actually amazing the effect of that. Because usually by the time you're in the national championship final, you're playing, in effect, the best or the second best or third best team in the country. And so when you're in that game, what's staggering to me is how rarely we have ever lost a game in the national championship game. Our winning percentage of the national championship game is greater than our winning percentage, period, which is shocking. But all I'm recruiting is the huge admiration and affection I have for these extraordinary people that I've gotten to know over the course of 3.5 years. So for me, that's what it's all about. And most of them keep those letters. For this documentary, they had some of the players actually read those letters for the documentary. And what that meant is these are kids who graduated years ago. They kept the letters. And then there's even a woman that was interviewed by a guy that wrote a book about, I think, coaching. And as a result, her letter was shared publicly in this book. And so there was a Stanford professor, and I can't remember if it was in sports psychology or something else, who actually teaches some of the stuff we do in the senior letters in the course that he extends to people that are attending Stanford University. And I really appreciate that, because what this guy gets is he gets the incredible motivational power of being personally connected with everyone in the room. And in my opinion, that's the absolute most critical, I guess, leadership quality that you can extend to the people that you're trying to lead, is to personally understand every one of them and understand what makes them exceptional, and then share that in the public forum. Because they will, and this is a cliche, people don't, know what you say. They, don't know, what you've written about them, but they all know how you made them feel. This makes every one of them feel extraordinary. And so that's what I've learned in coaching women.
And just to circle back, so 28 national championship games, 22 titles. So that is an incredible conversion rate, and maybe things such as the senior leaders contribute an extra 1 or 2% to that, but it's all the other things that go along. And you mentioned a word around the athletes or student athletes cauldron of a campaign, a career. So I can't let you go without asking you around the competitive cauldron. We had Tori Hanson, a former student athlete of yours, on the show a few months ago, and it's detailed heavily in one of your two books, and I'll add the show notes I'll add your book titles rather in the show notes. I encourage people to go and explore this further, but in your own words, maybe just describe to the audience and then the coaches listening in how they might be able to apply a version of it in their own environment, which speaking on the Tori Hanson episode, I alluded to the fact that I created a bit of a watered down bespoke version because we didn't have thousands of interns taking stats on everything we did, but I would apply the element of measured execution or competition, wins or losses, into either a part of every session that week or a whole day was dedicated to, we're going to track this. And I linked it to a selection for the weekend's game where we would categorize people into forwards, midfielders, defenders, and then effectively the bottom ranked player in each of those categories, barring things such as injury or illness or whatever else, wouldn't make the roster for that particular game. So there's some caveats to that, but I took the concept, adapted it to my environment, put it to work with some, varied success, and some feedback was different. But yeah, speaking as the man who created this and applied this for a number of years, I'd love to hear your thoughts on it.
Yeah, well, basically, people ask me all the time, what do you credit your success to? And I've got three things I talk about constantly. The first and the most important thing that I think has made a big difference from the beginning was the competitive cauldron. And obviously, we all have to coach through our own personalities. And competition for me is everything. And so, what we do with a cauldron, and I don't use the cauldron to select who to play. We've had some people finish in the top 10 that we don't start or play maximum minutes. We have some people that are as low as 16 or 17 that start and play maximum minutes. And so I don't need the cauldron to tell me who to play. I can look at a practice and know who I'm going to play. But the reason the cauldron has huge value is just like with, if you're in the weight room, you're developing your musculature. If you're, shooting on a wall, you're developing your ability to strike a ball with, accuracy and power. So you've got all these different things that sort of develop different aspects of your, I guess, soccer personality. I think the aspect that most of us assume everyone's going to have is mentality. And I disagree. Everyone thinks they're competitive because for 2 or 3 minutes they can compete in something. That's not competitive. When you occasionally select to go after something just to demonstrate that, well, whenever I like, I can beat anyone I like, and that's good enough for them. That's not competitive fire. That's not the critical quality. So for me, the cauldron is critical to see who every single second of every practice is trying to kick everyone's ass in and trying to fight their way to the top. Because then what they're developing is that muscle between their ears that we call mentality. And here's what's interesting. Isn't it extraordinary that the United States women, with this recent gold medal in the Olympics, have now, in effect, won 9 world championships? This is not our game. This is the world's game. How do we dominate the world's game in such a consistent fashion? Is it because we have the most technical players on the planet? No. The Japanese blow us out of the water. The Spaniards right now would blow us out of the water. Are we the most tactical teams? No. The Germans are much better. I think in general, the English are better. I mean, so what is the one quality that separates the United States from every country in the world? It's our frigging mentality. I built that from 1986 to 1994. It's still a part of our DNA. And you have to train that like a muscle. And so basically everything counts. Now, I didn't put the additional pressure on them to let them know that it counted to an extent where if you didn't finish high, you weren't even going to play, because there are some kids that are just gamers. They're very average in practice. They don't go after it, but they've got a couple qualities that you can hide on the field. They might be extraordinary in the air, and they like smashing into things. Their skill set's very below average, but maybe that's your 6, or maybe that's a center back next to another center back that can actually trap and pass. So that kid that's got all kinds of weaknesses in the cauldron is not going to finish that high necessarily. But here's what we've learned. We've learned that kids that finish in the top 4 in our cauldron are kids that end up playing for the United States full national team. It's consistent. We have produced more players that have won world championships and Olympic gold medals than any professional club in the world, maybe even times 10. We do it with mentality. So the cauldron for me is all about creating an environment where everything counts. Where if you're training for an hour and a half, you can't take 20 minutes off and be at the top of the cauldron. You've got to try to win everything, because you're going to have strengths and weaknesses. Some days you are going to be basically in the top 2 or 3, but some of the things in that day you're going to be in the bottom 2 or 3, but it's got to average out so you're basically a lot higher. So for me, it's developing a mentality to consistently compete. So for me, the cauldron is all about creating an atmosphere of competition. The other value for you as a coach is it allows you very objectively to give a player review without losing the trust of the player. So keep in mind what I was chatting about earlier with the women. What's critical is they trust you. One of the best ways to create trust is to let the numbers critique the players while you are giving them nothing but support and direction. So they get nothing subjective from your basically critique. The numbers critique them. So if they're really bad at something, you're not telling them they're bad at it. You're showing them their numbers. The numbers are saying you have selected to be bad at this because you haven't worked on it enough. And that's obviously language that you're not even talking about because they know they haven't worked on it. And then you get to construct their confidence. And they're going to trust you because all you're going to do in this player conference is tell them how they can change their place. I think you're a lot better than this. Do you agree? And invariably, they will agree why they want to get on the field. All right. Well, here's what you can do. And so I use the GROW mnemonic, which I stole from Whitmore, an absolutely brilliant a coaching book I read years ago that I absolutely love. And the G is your goals. The O, the R is the reality. The reality is the competitive cauldron. The O are the options that you're going to select to do to change your reality in order to achieve your goals. And the W is the most critical question. The W is, will you do it? On a 1 to 10 scale, will you do it? The stuff we've just chatted about. Will you live on a wall? Because right now, the reason you can't score a goal to save your life is the goalkeeper that you've shot at can read the label of the ball as it rolls over going towards them because it's moving so slowly. If you want to score goals at an elite level on the women's side, you've got to hit a shot between 60 and 70 miles an hour. If you're shooting in the low 50s, which is where the majority of the women live, you're not going to score goals at an elite level. So would you please live on a wall? Would you please play 1v1 on a consistent basis? Because these are all things that we have. We have 5 different 1v1 ladders. We have technical training platforms that measure their ability to strike a ball with power, strike it over a distance, etc. So this is the cauldron. It's a measure of where you are in every aspect of your game and your development. That's just one piece, though. The piece I was talking about earlier with the basically the notes that we write players before championship games, that's from an entirely different area. And it's more holistic. It's about their core values. Do you have exceptional athletic character? We have 12 different categories we talk about for exceptional athletic character. You have exceptional, basically, principle centers for your character, which is stuff beyond the game itself. And we emphasize those in a very real way. When I meet with a player for a player conference and I meet with them 3 times formally a year, they come in and they have to recite our core values from memory. And then the team is going to evaluate them against whether or not they're living their core values. And if these kids aren't living their core values, I'm going to try to figure out a way for them to find another place to play. Because if you don't believe in any of this, you don't belong here. So let's find a place where, it doesn't matter, how you behave or how you commit yourself. And then the final piece is trying to get everyone's personal narrative to the truth as fast as possible. The trouble with a modern player is, and this is interesting because I teach a class at UNC on the art and science of expertise. And one of the lectures I get to give is self-awareness. And I basically, at the beginning of class, and the class has anywhere from 300 to 325 kids in it, I'll ask the class, do you think you're self-aware? And then because we've got this relationship between their phones and the screen, they will type in whether or not they think they're self-aware. What's interesting on a typical lecture that I give on self-awareness, between 85 and 95% of the people in the room think they're self-aware. You know what the percentage is of people that are self-aware? 15%. That's the same for all the teams that all of us are coaching. 15% of the kids that you're coaching are self-aware. So what's one of your major jobs as a coach? One of your major jobs as a coach is to get your kids to understand their personal narrative and take it to the truth as fast as possible. Because most players have delusions of grandeur. And what's vital is for them to come to the conclusion they're not self-aware, because then they will change it. Most of us have a personal narrative that's designed to protect us from pain and accountability. So most of our personal narratives are laced with excuses for why we haven't succeeded. And it protects us in a very good way to some extent, because then it's not as painful. If you're an extraordinary coach, what you're going to be really good at doing is getting their personal narrative to the truth as fast as possible. The faster you can get their personal narrative to the truth, the faster they're going to be on a trajectory to becoming an exceptional player. So those are the three things that for me are absolutely critical if you want to take your profession to a completely different level. And they're all so different in a way, but they all involve your capacity to communicate. One is through data. Another one is through things that inspire you. So your core values have to inspire you because you want them to live certainly the things that inspire you. And then finally, you have to have a very serious dialogue with each player on a consistent basis to get them to embrace the fact there's another level in them. And right now, they're delusional if they think that what they're doing right now is good enough for them to get to the promised land.
Anson, there's been some incredible, not even little nuggets of wisdom there. There's some huge rocks in that. So I'm looking forward to listening back to unpack a lot of that as well. But it's a really nice transition to advice there for athletes. So don't just wear the coach's hat listening to that last sort of 5 minutes. Athletes listen, and there's so much in there. That G.O.A.T acronym, spoke about mentality. If we move a little bit now towards some of the top players, and I've got two that I'm going to want to talk to you about. Firstly is Mia Hamm. Now we could list 100 top strikers that you've worked with, but Mia Hamm probably potentially globally is one of the more well-known ones that we're going back a few generations now. But what made her special? What was her attributes that she brought outside of your environment? So you spoke highly around mentality, and obviously she's now in a good environment where she can develop her football or soccer traits. But, there's an excerpt in your book where you were driving to your office and you saw this person running around the field, and that's kind of the idea of the man watching, where the work that gets put into the shadows that no one's going to give you credit for, but there's things that you do away from the team that actually help shape you become the athlete, and whatever sport this is. Our sport is football and soccer, but let's just speak for the next few minutes around her qualities, what made her so special.
Well, thank you for asking about Mia, because obviously she's been an amazing, iconic athlete for the American game in the most positive way. And the thing that was completely different about Mia is just, if you saw her play, her athletic platform just separated her. She had acceleration at a world-class level, even from a very young age. So that separated her right out of the gate. But the mental aspects of what separated her is she had a hunger to score, that she would be agitated at halftime if she hadn't scored in the first half. And some athletes are so driven, you almost can't even talk to them at the half if they haven't scored. Mia was one of those. The standard she set for herself was so extraordinarily high that she was just driven to score. And getting back to the man watching and the note I wrote her, again, I'm not just writing notes, during the championship weekend. Whenever I see anyone do anything extraordinary, and in the old days, it was a note. These days, my gosh, we've got this phone in front of us. We are connected with everyone with text messaging. You can just dash off a note in a second to someone that's impressed you. And so the note I wrote her was basically in the spring of her senior year. I was driving through a park. It was a shortcut to work. Actually, it wasn't even a shortcut. It was a long way to go to work, but it was just much more scenic. So I decided to go this route. And all of a sudden, I'm seeing this figure go 5 and back, 10 and back, 15 and back, 20 and back, 25 and back, which is our fitness exercise we call cones. It is excruciatingly painful. You would never do this, especially on your own. I mean, you'd be just crazy to do this on your own. All of a sudden, I realized who it was because I'd stopped to pull over to watch her, and it was Mia. I went into work, scribbled a note to her, dropped the mail, and forgot about it. And 10 years later, in a book she wrote, she sent me a copy of the book. There in the breastplate of the book was the note I'd written her. And again, this was just to connect with her, to let her know that, she was doing the things that could take her to a completely different level. And then, of course, she did. By the time she wrote the book, she was one of the most famous soccer players in the world. And the reason I wrote it to her was because it was the final measure in athletic greatness. because what you do on your own when no one's watching you is that final measure, because everyone goes to practice. We all go to practice. I mean, coaches go to practice, players go to practice. If you think that's going to separate you, it's not. It's what you do outside of practice, the process you select to invest in your platforms outside of practice, that's going to determine who you are. And the thing I also loved about the book, getting back to the statement you asked earlier, is the thing she said in the book that I really appreciated. She says, when I got to North Carolina, I could finally be who I was. Because in almost every other environment she was in, she was told to stop beating everyone to death. Because the coach was going to tell her that if you keep beating everyone to death, the whole team's going to quit and we're not going to have a team. So every place she moved growing up, and she was an Air Force brat, so her dad moved probably every 3 years, she couldn't find a culture that embraced who she was. And the thing I loved about the line in the book is she says, when I got to North Carolina, I could finally be the athlete I was. Who was she? She was a shark with blood in the water. And we embraced her. We loved her for it. That had never happened to her before. So in that book were a lot of things that I treasure. And a part of it was the mentality she had that I loved, that I protected. Because by the way, when you've got an athlete like that wants to beat everyone to death in every single second of every practice, and you're a women's coach, you're going to have to protect her from her own culture, because they're all going to excoriate her behind her back. And you've got to protect those amazing athletes.
Yeah, what you do in the shadows or away from formal organized activity applies to coaches as well, right? So personal development, going and exploring different environments, reading books, listening to podcasts, having conversations with people, identifying your own gaps, creating a plan. These are things that do separate the elite from the sub-elite. So Mia doing those runs, you said, who would do these? Well, the top athletes in the world, the top professions in the world go and do the extra mile. So yeah, some really good advice. The second person, if I just frame this a little bit for the audience, so the US national women's team head coach. Now that's an iconic brand in itself, and as you said, they just won the Olympic gold medal in France. But US national team coach from 86 to 94, the first FIFA Women's World Cup in 1991. You go as head coach, world champions. So your captain for that team was also a player that you were working with at UNC at the time. So April Henricks. So I had the real pleasure of meeting for the first time last week as part of our a pro license we're on. She came in and as a FIFA technical director for Football Australia, shared some wisdom and spent the day with us. An incredible person, spoke very highly of you, cracked a few jokes about, this young guy who was our college coach. Shorts were too short at the time and come in and now to the national team. My question a little bit around April, what did you see in her that you made her captain? And for those who don't know, April, she captained for the World Championship as a player, has since done that as a coach. So has won the World Cup as a player and as a coach, or a captain and a coach, as well as Olympic gold medals. She's had a fantastic career herself. So two parts to this question. What did you see in her that you wanted to put her in a leadership role? And she's since gone on and carried the baton for coaching and beyond, right, to the US national team and now as technical director. Was there an element of trying to mentor her, or did you see an element that she could be a future coach, and you kind of gave her some different layers of challenge and support to see that? And is that legacy of UNC into the US national women's team, is that a really big thing that you prided yourself on as you were in the moment, not just looking back now from retirement? I know there's a lot to unpack in that. Sorry for the three questions in one, but take it as you wish.
No, I love it. First of all, I have incredible admiration and respect for April, and we were built for each other. She originally didn't go to college to play soccer. She went to college to play basketball. And the only way I heard about her was from this other coach that I really respected that had the top youth team in America. And he knew there wasn't a kid on his roster that could start for me in college. He was just a really well-organized coach. And, he was so good that his team beat every team in the country. And he goes to this tournament. I think it was somewhere maybe in New York or Boston or something. And after the tournament, he calls me up and said, Anson, I think there's a kid in Colorado that can play for you. And I said, what's her name? And he said, her name is April Henricks. And so I went out there to recruit her. And I didn't get to see her play in an 11-11 game. I saw her play in a gym with basically sneakers on, maybe 4-on-4, 5-on-5. And I was stunned because, just like me, an explosive athlete, very strong, very competitive. And I just loved watching her. And so I started recruiting her. And what was interesting is my recruiting process, because when I called her up, I was so used to recruiting men. Recruiting men is incredibly simple at a school like this. Hello, my name is Anson Dorrance. I'm the men's soccer coach at the University of North Carolina. I've seen you play. I've got some money for you. They grunt a couple times. Great. See you in August. At a school like mine, if I can offer them a large enough scholarship and assure them they're going to play, they don't even want to have a conversation. I mean, a couple grunts and that's it. And I'm thinking, I can't wait to recruit April with this clearly brilliant, women's, recruiting technique. So I call her up and, hello, April, I've seen you play. I've got some money for you. I think you can step in and start for me at right wing. And I'm trying to hang the phone up. And she says, well, hang on, coach. How does your team get along? And I was thinking to myself, oh my gosh, that's an interesting question. So every time I called her, she kept wanting to extend the conversation. I have money for you. You can step in and start. And I was thinking, that's all I need to do. No, she wanted to know how my team got along. I invented something. I said, I don't know. They get along great. Who knew? Who cared? But I didn't understand why she kept asking me that question until she came in. She basically introduced herself as the best recruit in that recruiting class. She beat up on all the freshmen, sophomores, juniors, and seniors. She was a force on this earth. And all of a sudden, one player after another is in my office saying, what are you going to do about April? What are you going to do about April? I was thinking to myself, well, clone her? Are you kidding me? This is the greatest thing I'd ever seen in my life. I mean, she was so competitive. She wanted to win everything all the time. I mean, she was the first player I picked for the U.S. women's national team. I mean, the first player I picked. And I pointed at her with the rest of the national team players, who, by the way, were also very talented. And I said, that's how we're going to train. We're going to train like a shark with blood in the water. We're going to go after every country in the world, and we're going to train like that. And so we were made for each other. I didn't have to motivate her to go after every single second of every game. She did it naturally. When I was hired to coach the U.S. women's national team in 1986, the United States had never won a game in international competition. 5 years later, we were world champions. April was the perfect captain for me at UNC and for the U.S. women's national team. She was the perfect messenger about what women can do if you allow them to become who they can be. And what's interesting, on the men's side, if you're competitive, you're put on a pedestal. On the women's side, if you're competitive, you're excoriated by your own culture. Like there's something wrong with it. There's nothing wrong with it. So April was my role model for what a woman could be, a combative warrior on the soccer field. And I just loved her for it.
You're coaching, you're the head coach at UNC, the women's program, and now the national team women's coach at the same time. So there's a situation here which could be relevant to coaches listening, where they might be a club coach or a school coach, and they get a representative program for a short window where they can select from a variety of different schools or clubs. And we've worked with players at one club, so Club A, in your case, UNC, but you've got all the other programs around America you can select from, and no doubt you select players from external environments to your own. I guess providing some context and now some advice for coaches who might find themselves in that scenario, where you got to be very careful that you don't just favor April and Mia and the UNC girls that and they know you, and there's elements of other players coming in who are direct competitors to UNC. How did you then, and maybe if you had your time again, would there be things that you would do different or improve upon to balance that concern around, or he's just going to pick his favorites, or he's only going to play these players? Like, maybe just briefly speak around that kind of scenario, because it's a real one for us in our world here.
No, that's a very good question. Fortunately for me, our UNC teams back in the day beat everyone to death. So there'd be a logical reason for picking most of the players off my roster. In that first Women's World Championship in 1991, on an 18-player roster, 9 were from my team, my college team. And back in those days, we beat everyone to death. So it was sort of logical. Now, did we get some criticism for that? Absolutely. And what protected us from the criticism? Well, we won the World Cup. So usually that sort of thing protects you from criticism. But it's going to come with a position, and it just comes with the territory. I understood it. I embraced it. And then what would happen when these kids would come in, I'm setting up a mini competitive cauldron in my camps. And so then what ends up happening is I'll bring in 32 players of the best players in the United States. And then what happens on the first morning? Well, they either have a fitness test or they play in a 1v1 tournament. By the end of the week, they have a competitive cauldron result on everything. And one of the competitive cauldron results is what happens on a Saturday afternoon and Sunday. Because what I learned also in this process is when I pick a collection of players to go on tour after bringing in 32, usually a player will go up to a friend that made the roster and sort of ask, did you see I didn't make it? And because they've approached a friend, the friend will usually protect that player against the chaos of the possibility they didn't deserve to make it. So what will a friend say? Oh my gosh, you should have made it. You were great this week. And then the dilemma for me in the exit interviews is the players that weren't picked. I couldn't really convince them to do anything because they thought they were cheated because all of their friends that made the team felt that, they should have made it. So what I started doing on Saturday nights, if I had a team for a week, is after all the stuff we did all week to structure the cauldron, we would have a player draft on Saturday night as we set up a 4v4 tournament. I would pick 8 starters from my team to pick the 4v4 teams. So who's picking these teams? Well, Mia Hamm, Christine Lilly, Julie Foudy, Karen Jennings-Gabera, April Henricks. Basically, the 8 starters from my team are picking the 4v4 teams. Who's picking the next day when we play 11v11? The other 2 field player starters that didn't end up in the 8-player 4v4 draft. So now in the exit interviews, where normally there's a lot of friction between me and the kid I haven't picked, I ask right out of the gate, do you want to see your draft rank? In other words, do you want to see if Mia Hamm picked you in the first 18? Or Julie Foudy picked you in the first 18, or if April Henricks actually wanted to play with you on this tour, do you want to see what their opinions are? And of course, every one of them would say yes. And then, of course, they were much more open to what I would recommend they do if they sorted out that their draft was 28. In other words, no one on the 8 team we were taking, certainly in the starting lineup, wanted to play with them. And then all of a sudden, for the first time, they're listening to me on the exit interview on what they should do if they wanted to change their place. So these are all the different things we did to try to create a culture of responsibility. Responsibility is another word for accountability, but I prefer it to accountability. The only thing I don't like about the word accountability is it's a blame culture. Responsibility is the opposite. The responsibility is I am going to take responsibility culture. And so for me, it was all about trying to pick the best players. And so is there friction in any team you pick? Absolutely. And does this mean I had no friction back then? No, I did have friction. But one thing that helped me solve it is with a player draft from the starters from my team that everyone respected, because very rarely is it a huge problem in the difference between player 18 and 19. They want to win the respect of the kids in the first 11.
That's thank you for sharing that. I hadn't come across that. That's an incredible way. I was writing down here, and I've spoken about this in the past, trying to provide an objective way or measure or mechanism to a subjective problem selection. For example, and the competitive cauldron is a way to measure some things using senior players to, whilst it's still their subjective opinion, it's not your subjective opinion, which helps again with that kind of objective um, around decisions and the relationship piece. So yeah, I really appreciate that. That's some great food for thought. One key part of these sort of conversations that maybe we haven't alluded to in this past hour is the relationship and interaction around the parents and how they can positively impact, negatively impact, be neutral, with the development curve of these young athletes, more so than coaches, but these young athletes who are striving to their own high performance. So just to sort of close us off in this conversation, yeah, what is your advice to parents of that 17 to 23-year-old athlete who's on their journey to whatever their chosen sports pinnacle event is, that can make a positive impact rather than maybe detrimental to the athlete's journey?
Another wonderful question. I'm going to answer that with something that's happened the last couple of years that all of us have taken notice of. The University of North Carolina is where Michael Jordan went to school. We are a big basketball program. We are considered a blue blood in basketball. The other blue bloods in basketball at a collegiate level on the men's side are University of Kentucky, Duke University, certainly Kansas. But the team that's won the national championship the last couple of years is a team from Connecticut, the University of Connecticut Huskies. The coach of that team is a gentleman by the name of Dan Hurley. Dan Hurley doesn't have the opportunity to recruit the blue blood athletes. He basically recruits, I guess the cliche you could use, are silver medalists. He doesn't get to recruit gold medalists for his roster. He recruits silver medalists. So the question that all of us had watching him win two back-to-back against the Blue Bloods is, what the heck is he doing? What he does for his roster is he picks the right parents. And here's what a parent does. A parent, when their kid isn't playing, basically says to the kid, well, I think you should work harder. Those parents are becoming extinct. He figured out a way to find them, and he recruited those parents and their kids to come represent him at the University of Connecticut. Because basically now what's happening with most parents, they are public relations firms for their sons and daughters, which basically doesn't work. Because then if their kid isn't playing maximum minutes or in basketball, having the opportunity to shoot 40 times a game, and I don't know anything about basketball, so I don't want to pretend I know anything I don't. But here's what I do know about Dan Hurley. He's figured something out. He's figured out that if you want to have an excellent team, recruit excellent parents. Because then the fight to get on the court for them is about trying harder, not about negotiating your way onto the team. And so how does he certify whether or not these parents are good parents or not? Well, he sees how many teams they traded with as high school players, bouncing from team to team to team to get the ball the most, shoot the ball the most, have the best scoring average. And he basically sorted out that those are not the sort of kids he wants to recruit. He wants to recruit a kid whose parent will tell the kid if he's not playing, yeah, you want to play? Listen to the coach, work harder. That's what's going to get you on the floor. And so, again, it gets back to what I was saying earlier about the third prong in elite player development. It's getting everyone's personal narrative to the truth as fast as possible. And the people that usually destroy a young athlete's personal narrative are the parents. They have this misguided, I guess, process to help their kids by embracing them for anything they're doing. And they don't understand the correct process. The correct process is to challenge them. Isn't to basically say, well, that coach doesn't respect you, so we've got to, find a different team for you to play for. No, that parent understands the basics of parenthood, which is, work harder, be a good teammate, support the people that are on the floor. When you get your chance because you've worked hard, you're going to be ready. Can you handle that? Because that's preparing them for adulthood. And what most of these parents are doing, they are shattering the maturation of their own children. Because if they really want to prepare their kids for real life, they've got to prepare them for the possibility that, you know what? It's never going to be easy. And there are going to be good days and bad days. And you've got to be able to navigate both in the most positive way. So for me, that's a very critical piece.
I agree with you. It's a critical piece, and a big part of these conversations is to bring the parent in the conversation that coach to coach can have, and athlete to coach, and just become, whilst maybe we're not speaking directly to parents, maybe when we're talking around the competitive cauldron, there's always elements through conversation that parents listening in can become more aware of or conscious of, can think a little bit more laterally, and then try to apply it, as opposed to the direct, I'm now speaking to a parent, they tune in. My encouragement to parents listening in is to listen to all of the conversation with your parent hat on, or with your with your son or daughter as they have their athlete hat on, and have further conversations around the things that you're listening to and pick up in these conversations. But that last sort of statement is world class advice, and that's something that we can share a long way. Anson, I could speak for another hour and a half with you. It's been absolutely incredible, but I am conscious of your time. So I thank you for everything so far. In the show notes, we'll put links to your three books, The Man Watching, The Vision of a Champion, Training Soccer Champions. You also have a podcast, or had a podcast come out through COVID that I listened to. I'll add a link to that as well, because there's a lot more stories and information that we can link to for people to listen into. But we finish off here with our rapid fire questions. So looking forward to some of these responses. So to finish us off, can you set or pose a question for me and the audience to ponder on for this week?
Yes, I think the most critical thing is to look at those three platforms that I talked about earlier that I think separates my program, the Competitive Cauldron, creating a culture of core values, of principle-centered living, and then getting everyone's personal narrative to the truth. How would you guys rank the value of those three, and how would you go about implementing them in your current coaching environments?
There's a lot to unpack there. But hey, brilliant. Two questions. Can you outline one concept or idea that you've thought about, implemented in your own world, that maybe you can share with us that you haven't already?
Yes. There are two aspects of character. One is actual character. And all you have to do is to type into your web browser, UNC Women's Soccer core values, and you'll see our holistic core values. But the athletic core values, I think, are really interesting to drive an athlete to his or her potential. And what they are self-discipline, competitive fire, self-belief, love of the ball, love of playing the game, love of watching the game, grit, coachability, athleticism, and process. The way we run our athletic character conversation is we allow the athletes to estimate where they are on a 5-point scale. 5 is a U.S. full national team player in this particular silo. 4.5 is professional level. 4 is UNC starter level. 3.5 is a kid that plays in every half. 3 is a kid who travels but doesn't play. And anything below that is a kid who doesn't travel or play. I want all of my kids to have an understanding of exactly where they are. So this is a part of the process to get their personal narrative to the truth. And so we have objective criteria in almost every one of those to basically construct an athletic character piece that's telling them where they're going. Because what I need my athletes to know is, at their current rate of commitment, here's where they're going. And then we average out all those, 12 different silos, and it comes up with a number. And the number is getting back to the GROW mnemonic. The G is the goal, R are realities. And the reality is those 12 categories basically to let you know if you're on track to play in each half, to start. Can you sign a pro contract right now? Because what's happening right now is the NWSL has no restrictions on them and their ability to sign athletes that I've already got at UNC. We lost 3 kids that had eligibility left. One was drafted number 1 in the NWSL draft last year. One was drafted 2. Another one left to play in Italy. These kids had eligibility left. And so I want them to know if they want to go pro, they can. And why? Because they're in a position to go, and I am not going to hold them back. And that's another thing, getting back to being trusted. I will always be trusted by every one of my kids because every one of them knows that went pro that I supported it. Now, did I necessarily like it? No. Was I hoping they would stay? Absolutely. But they know they're in a position to sign a pro contract because our algorithm has been worked on for so long and it's incredibly accurate and successful. So that athletic character piece is something I've worked on forever. And I think it has a huge impact on helping the kids understand exactly where they are.
Yeah, I love that. I was in a conversation last week with a men's coach up in Sydney, and he similar. He like kind of 4 columns and players on a magnet on each of these 4 columns. The column to the far right is this player can basically do whatever they want. They're gonna play because they need them because of the quality that they possess. Now it could be execution, but it could also be the value to the team. Next one back is, yeah, they're a key player. They can't get away with complete murder, but they can, they've earned enough trust by me and my staff and our players that they can live here. And then slowly the far left one is you guys are the ones that probably aren't playing a lot and maybe don't have a contract offer next season. Without having to say anything, it's your job is to get yourself to the right-hand side of the board, not stay in this left-hand column. And the rudimentary to some description, but again, speaking to that character piece and providing other ways for players to see where their reality and to move forth. But brilliant. Provide us a recommendation for a book, a movie, or a podcast for coaches or athletes or parents that can help them on their journey.
It's Coaching for Performance: The Principles and Practice of Coaching and Leadership by Sir John Whitmore. This is the 5th edition. It is absolutely extraordinary. I am now reading it for the 5th time. And I think it's absolutely extraordinary.
Excellent. I've not heard of it. Trust me, I'm going to be checking that out in the next half an hour and purchasing one to fly out here to Melbourne. Thank you for sharing that. If you had a magic wand and you can wave it and change one thing, I'm going to limit this to women's professional football or soccer. What would you change?
How we advance in tournaments when the score is tied. One of the worst things about football is the penalty kick as a form of advancement. There's a group called TST that put on a 7v7 tournament here in North Carolina for the last 2 years. This past summer, they had $1 million prize on the men's side and the women's side. It was a 7v7 tournament. I loved it. At the end of the game, let's assume your team won 3-0, the game wouldn't be over. Then what they would do is the next team that basically gets to 4, the first team that gets to 4, the game would be over. So if you're winning 3-0, all you got to do is score 1 more. But if you've lost 3-0, you've got to score 4 goals to win. What I love about that is the game ends in a goal. And if every single game ended in a goal, the excitement that I saw in the crowd, you could cut the excitement with a knife. It was so much fun. The other thing I liked about it is after a couple minutes in the overtime period, each team lost a player, then they lost another one. And eventually it would go down to 1v1 or maybe 2v2, 3v3. I can't remember anymore. But basically you will get to whatever result pretty quickly. The thing I hate about our game right now, 2 things. I hate the way you advance with penalty kicks. That's not football. That's like a free throw shooting contest at the end of a basketball game to determine who advances. That's absolutely ridiculous. We have to eliminate the penalty kick. I have had so many kids scarred by losing a national championship for us. It is destructive. And people tell me whenever I bring this up in meetings, oh, that's because your players are just too soft. Lionel Messi quit the game after missing a penalty kick in the Copa America. Lionel Messi quit the game. So you're telling me that this is just, the kids aren't tough. That is absolutely absurd. It's not football. We have to change that. So here's what should happen. As soon as the overtime period begins, you eliminate the offsides law and you go from 11v11 down to 8v8. And every 5 minutes you take off a player. Trust me, with no offsides and all that space, especially when you get down to 6v6 or 5v5 on a 120 by 75, there's going to be a result. And it's going to be an exciting result. So that's one thing I would do. And then the other thing is we basically cripple our referees. I was a rugby player growing up. We had huge respect for the referees. If you ran at the referee, you were thrown off the frigging field. I hate watching football now because in any controversial call, the referee is attacked by both teams. There's no respect for that position anymore. Basically, eliminate the yellow card. It's a useless call. It might help Tottenham Hotspur when Arsenal picks up their second yellow for Declan Rice, in the game before they play Hotspur. But basically, it's so stupid. Why benefit the team in the next game because of an egregious mistake in the first game? That's just so dumb. Let's give the referees more weapons. Let's give them sin bins. If you hug a guy on a corner kick, you're out of the game for the next 15 to 20 minutes and your team has to cope. If you grab their jersey, you're off the field for 15 minutes. Your team has to cope. If you come in with a very vicious tackle, don't give them a yellow card. Throw them off the friggin' field for violent behavior, and your team is down a man. And if they keep hugging on corner kicks, keep throwing them out until they've got like 2 or 3 people left on the field, and they will stop doing it. Because here's one thing I know. Players will want to stay on the field. So what will that eliminate? It'll eliminate jersey grabbing. It'll eliminate hugging on corner kicks. It'll eliminate all the things we hate about the game. And if a player runs at the referee and he doesn't have a captain's armband on, immediate thrown off the field for 30 minutes. Immediate.
Love it. I love the passion, love the thought. You've obviously had these sort of conversations in the past with some people. I'll just circle back. So touch rugby have a drop-off rule. So again, scorers tied. Start with, I'm not sure how many players on the pitch, 77, and every 2 minutes or every minute, they 6v6, 5v5, until the first try is scored to determine the winner. We had golden goal back in the day that got kiboshed. You speak about sin bins. So I think here in Australia, rugby league and even rugby union use sin bins reasonably effectively to have an immediate punishment rather than the delayed punishment. I know back in New Zealand, the referees trialled a green card, and that was issued for like a 10-minute sin bin for language, for swearing, for things directed at the referee to kind of quash that side of the game. And it was brought in as a trial. I'm not quite sure where that got to in terms of implementation, but yeah, some fantastic food for thought and some great innovation there. One piece of advice that you can leave with me to help me on my coaching journey.
Well, I think you're doing all the right things, and I appreciate you telling me that you grabbed that book and read it. I think most of us in our profession, there's so much information out there for us. We all have to be readers. And by the way, not just readers about coaching books. Read everything. Read everything under the sun. Read everything, because what you want to have is the capacity to communicate with the people that you're coaching. And so, yes, we have to be readers. We have to explore, like what you're doing on this podcast, other people's ideas on what they've done that have worked out for them in the most positive way. So we all have to be lifetime learners. And so for me, it's so funny. I'm in retirement now. And what do I do all day if I had a choice? My wife knows this. I just want to read everything under the sun. And for me, I have a curiosity about the world I'm living in. I want to continue to be a part of this world and the people that are obviously close to me. And so let's be lifetime learners. Let's, support the communities we're in. Let's be positive life forces. And let's share everything we know like this. I mean, people are shocked when they ask me to jump on their podcast. I will jump on any podcast. In fact, during my retirement press conference, I was telling everyone in the room, as two 12-year-olds asked me to be on their podcast, I said yes. I mean, so yeah, let's all embrace each other. Let's all learn from each other, and let's help this incredible game that we're a part of get to a completely different level. Because I have lived the transformation of the women's game from absolutely nowhere to the apogee where we're living right now, and I absolutely love it.
Not only incredible advice, but incredible for you as a person to be so forthright and to do that kind of puts a lot of us to shame. So yeah, that's amazing. What is the thing that you are striving for today?
Let's see. I guess my wife knows this. She's in the next room. I'm trying to catch up on everything. I finally caught up today with all of the wonderful emails and text messages I was getting for my retirement. And now I'm going to try to catch up on all the notes people have written me because I want to write them back because I love getting handheld notes. And then I'm trying to catch up on all of my reading. I think I've got too many books in this house that I haven't read, so I want to catch up on that. So that's in my immediate future.
I love it. And finally, leave us with a quote for the week.
I guess, hang on, I will give you. Our kids memorize all these quotes. I'm going to give you the most important one, in my opinion. This is from Viktor E. Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning. Everything can be taken from a man but one thing, the last of the human freedoms, to choose one's attitude in any given set of circumstances, to choose one's own way. And there were always choices to make. Every day, every hour offered the opportunity to make a decision which determined whether you would or would not submit to those powers which threatened to rob you of your very self, your inner freedom, which determined whether or not you would become the plaything of circumstance. In the final analysis, it becomes clear that the sort of person you are is the result of an inner decision. Therefore, any man can decide that this last inner freedom cannot be lost. If everyone could live their life basically embracing an understanding of that quote, they're going to live an extraordinary life. So for me, of all the 13 core values that my kids memorize, that is the ring that rules them all.
Wow. What a way to finish an incredible conversation. And wow, what a incredible conversation as well. Coach Dorrance, for me, it's been a personal treat to have spent this time with you, to remain connected over a number of years. I did come to a UNC game in 2004 when you beat Kennesaw State 2-0 at home. I didn't get a chance to speak to you then. I had a friend playing for Kennesaw State, so I have been to the UNC campus and seen you play. Yeah, this conversation has been inspiring for me, and I'm no doubt other people listen in as well. So for your time, for your service to the game, and I still get a real sense that there's more work to be done in driving the game forward, as you said, and connecting with people. I wish you all the very best for the remaining time to drive that forward. Enjoy your retirement as well. And if you're ever out down this part of the world, I'd love to be able to take you out for a cup of coffee or a beer. Cheers.
I appreciate that. Well, thank you very much. I thoroughly enjoyed it. Thank you.
Thanks so much for sticking through to the end of this episode. It would mean the world to us if you could hit the like or share button so we can get these amazing insights out to other like-minded coaches, athletes, and parents. Cheers.